In most recent decades, we have witnessed the appearance of many emergent infectious diseases, which are defined as an infectious disease that was previously not described, or it has not really been common for like the last 20 years. So, located in some parts of the world are these emergent infectious disease. And the world has observed an average of one emergent disease per year. And many of these diseases have come from pathogens that normally infect animal hosts, and then now they've unexpectedly jumped to humans. This typically occurs because the disease can mutate really rapidly and eventually produce a genotype that can infect humans. Some of the most high profile diseases that have jumped from animals to humans are things like HIV, AIDS, Ebola, now mad cow disease, bird flu, SARS, West Nile virus. So these emerging diseases are increasing concern because the increased movement of people around the world and our cargo throughout the world during the past century has increased so much that currently diseases can spread to nearly any place of the earth within 24 hours. So, in the late 1970s, the pneumonia and cancer began appearing in individuals with like these weakened immune systems. And this condition responsible for this weakened immune system was acquired immune deficiency syndrome, also called AIDS. And that's caused by a HIV virus known as the human immunodeficiency virus. And this virus spreads through sexual contact, blood transfusions, even from mothers who pass it to the fetus, and usually amongst drug users who share unsanitized needles. And the origin of this virus remained a mystery until about 2006, when researchers found a genetically similar virus in the wild population of chimpanzees living in the African nation of Cameroon. And the researchers hypothesized that local hunters were exposed to the virus when they butchered or when they ate these chimpanzees. That's actually a common practice in that part of the world. But with the exposure to those viruses, it was able to infect the human host. And today, more than 33 million people in the world are infected with HIV, and 25 million people have died from AIDS-related illnesses. So, fortunately, new arrival drugs are now able to maintain low HIV populations inside the human body, and we're able to sustain and extend life. But from this lesson learned in combating other diseases like tuberculosis, combinations of these antiviral drugs are being used to reduce the risk of viruses. Or the virus will evolve resistant to any single drug. Unfortunately, many of those drugs are very expensive, and most people living in low income countries cannot afford those antivirals. So, although it's changing with wider availability to improve distribution, basically the drugs are not available to poor people. Ebola. In 1976, researchers first discovered Ebola, hemorrhagic fever, and this is an infectious disease with a high death rate, and it's caused by the Ebola virus. It was first discovered in the Democratic Republic of the Congo near the Ebola River, so the virus has infected several hundreds of humans that were there, and even other primates, and that's how it got the name Ebola. So the infections from this erratic outbreak were first discovered in 2014, and that 1 year they found that it had infected thousands of people. And so the Ebola virus is a particular concern because it kills a large percentage of those people who are infected. If an infected individual has suffered, a 50 to 89% death rate is what they can expect from outbreaks around the world. So those infected, they quickly begin to experience this fever, vomiting, and some internal bleeding, and even external bleeding. And so usually death occurs in like 2 weeks. And consequently, only experimental drugs are available to fight this particular virus. Unlike the progress that we've made identifying the origins of HIV, the natural source of Ebola, the Ebola virus, has been difficult to determine because the virus also kills other primates in really high rates. So, leaving no primate host for the virus, primates are not likely the long term source of the virus. So essentially, we cannot hone in on it because all we see are the animals that are dying. It's hard to identify the actual host where the virus is sustaining its part of its other life cycles. But in 2013, researchers discovered that fruit bats carry the Ebola virus and were likely the reservoir species that spread the virus to primates. In the 80s, scientists first discovered this neurological disease that we now call it mad cow disease, in which prions mutate into a deadly pathogen and they slowly damage a cow's nervous system. So the cows lose their coordination, and it's a condition of that's kind of like compared to a person who's going mad. And after they lose their coordination, then they die. So scientists now know that a small beneficial protein in the brains of cattle, which we call prions, they occasionally can mutate into this deadly protein that acts as a pathogen and it causes mad cow disease. Prions are not well understood by any means, and they represent a new category of pathogen that we did not know about 20, 30 years ago, or at least didn't understand. But in 1996, scientists in Great Britain announced that mad cow disease, also known as bovine spongiform encephalopathy, BSE, could be transmitted to humans who ate the meat of infected cattle. So, unlike harmful bacteria that can be killed with proper cooking, prions are pretty much impossible and very difficult to destroy by cooking. So, infected humans develop what we call this CJD disease, Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease, and they also suffer the same fate as an infected cow. These mutant prions cannot be transmitted among cattle that only live together. So, transmission requires an uninfected cow to consume the nervous system of an infected cow. And as a result, when cattle feed on grass together in a pasture, a rare mutation of this prion would basically be restricted to a single cow and not spread to other cattle. But in the 80s, the diets of European cattle commonly include ground up remains of dead cattle, and that became a source of additional protein for cows. But when these remains happen to contain this mutant prion, then those prions spread rapidly through the entire cattle population, and in turn infected humans who ate beef. In 2009, in Great Britain, a total of 180,000 cattle were infected, and 166 people had already died. So it's estimated that several thousands of people are currently infected, but the prion can exist in the human body for many years before we start to see any sort of symptoms of that disease. The European Union temporarily banned British beef imports in 1996, and the British government destroyed tens of thousands of cattle. And since that time, the disease has been found in several other countries like Canada and the United States, but only in a few cattle and not really in any humans. Today, new rules exist that can protect the feeding of cattle or the feeding of remains of cattle to other cattle. And as a result, the current risk of mad cow disease to humans has been greatly reduced. In fact, we've only seen a few cases since like 2014. It's pretty common for humans to contract many types of the flu virus. Like we've seen before, like the Spanish flu in 1918 killed up to like 100 million people, and Spanish flu was a type of influenza. We also know that as the swine flu, and that's caused by N1H1 virus. This virus is similar to the flu virus that humans normally contract, but N1H1 normally infects only pigs. That's another pandemic of swine flu occurred around the world from 2009 to 2010, and it caused more than 18,000 deaths. The most recent outbreak occurred in Venezuela in 2013, and that caused 1,000 people to become extremely ill. Fortunately, only a small percentage of those people actually died thanks to the availability of new drugs that we use to combat flu. In 2006, reports emerged from Asia that a related virus known as H5N1, also known as bird flu, had jumped from birds to people, primarily to the people who were in close contact with these birds. Infections are rarely, deadly to wild birds, but they can frequently cause like domestic birds, like ducks and chickens and turkeys, to become very, very sick and die. Humans often contract a variety of flu viruses, but because humans have no evolutionary history with H5N1, we have we've evolved very few defenses against that particular flu virus. And as of 2014, 600 people have become infected with H5N1, and over half of them have already died. So governments have responded to the risk by destroying a large number of infected birds. Currently, the H5N1 virus is not easily passed amongst people, but in the future, it can definitely mutate and become, and make it easier for it to be transmitted. So scientists have estimated now that H5N1, or bird flu, has potentially killed 150 million people to date. In 2003, an unusual form of pneumonia was spreading throughout the human population of Southeast Asia, and it eventually was named SARS, Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. And while some of the respiratory symptoms are similar to bird flu or swine flu, SARS is a disease caused by a different type of virus. It's called the coronavirus. Your book has it as two words, but it's actually one word, coronavirus. And that's a different type of virus than those that typically cause flu. And this can spread from one person to another, just like similar, like other ways that viruses do. But during this particular outbreak, more than 8,000 people were infected and 10% of them died. This in particular respiratory virus that your book doesn't talk about, but it also can infect the gut system. So not only is it spread through similar ways that the cold virus actually spreads, coughing, sneezing, it stays in like a water droplet. And so when you sneeze, it stays inside that water droplet. It can also go into your gut system. Now, the West Nile virus, it lives in hundreds of species of birds, and it's pretty much transmitted amongst birds like through mosquitoes. And although the virus can be highly lethal to some species of birds, like blue jays and even crows, and American crows specifically, and the American robins as well, most species of birds survive an infection from West Nile. During the later half of the 12th century, I'm sorry, the 12th century, at the 20th century, there were increasing reports coming out that the virus could sometimes infect horses and go to humans, and it had done that through horses and humans that were bitten by mosquitoes. But the first human case was identified in 1937. It was in the West Nile region of Uganda, and that's how the virus got its name, West Nile. In humans, this virus causes an inflammation of the brain, which leads to a traumatic illness and, of course, death. In 1999, the virus appeared in New York, and it quickly spread throughout much of the United States. And now we have a history with the West Nile virus here in the United States. The highest numbers of infections and deaths from this particular virus occurred in 2002 and 2003. Increased efforts to combat mosquito populations and protect against mosquito bites have basically caused the decline of this particular virus.